CODEO deployed 4,000 polling station observers to 4,000 polling stations across the country. And as you indicated, we monitor the process, and then we also look at the outcome. So on election day, CODEO issued 2 main statements, which look essentially at the voting processes. And then towards the end of the day, we also issued a second statement, which looked at the closing and counting processes. I have looked at our reports from 2012, 2016, and 2020 on the process, and I have seen that significantly there isn't so much differences. The processes, as far as voting is concerned, went quite smoothly. If you recall, in 2016 we had a fairly smooth voting processes, and it was good to note that again we had quite smooth processes on election day in 2020. I look at the, if you look at the setup, you look at the availability of voting materials, you look at the performance of biometric verification devices, and essentially across the various polling stations that we have observers reporting, there were generally a smooth process. You didn't have that many challenges coming through from our observers. And then if you look at the issue of security presence, I mean, in 2012, for instance, if you look at that report, security deployment was around 85% of polling stations that we had observers reporting. In 2016, it's moved slightly to 88%. And for the 2020 elections, observers indicated that at 85% of polling stations, they had some security presence. In terms of the performance of biometric verification devices, if you look at our 2020 report, there were some challenges at just about 10% of polling stations, which was a bit poorer compared to 2016, where we had challenges in just about 6% of polling stations, but the situation was much worse in 2012. So generally, if we look at what happened at the availability of materials, we had said that the arrangement that had been put in place by the Electoral Commission was generally adequate and good enough to allow any voter to vote. Then towards the end of the day, we also looked at the counting and results declaration, and this is where we rely on the para-vote tabulation mechanism to essentially look at the outcomes, official results declared by the Electoral Commission. Let me indicate that whereas voting went quite well, especially also because the Electoral Commission had increased the number of polling stations, and so there were fewer queues at most places, you realize that the pressure moved rather to the collation centers. And so, I mean, in 2016, for instance, you had 28,000 plus polling stations. Now we had added on about 10,000 more polling stations. And so the collation centers were receiving from a lot more polling stations. And so there was a bit of congestion at the various collation centers that you saw collation take place. And unfortunately, I think this is where we had a bit of challenge in terms of crowd management and in terms of making sure that there was calm at various polling stations. Now, with the outcomes of the official results that were declared, and CODEO used the PVT to also look at what was coming in, let me just indicate that if you look at the PVT, what CODEO does essentially is to sample polling stations. So we used a stratified random sampling technique to select about 1,502 polling stations and just to use statistical principles and analysis to compare the figures that are coming in from the Electoral Commission to see if significantly there's any deviation in what is coming out from the Electoral Commission and what CODEO is also gathering from the polling stations. Again, let me indicate that our PVT estimate is based on results declared at the polling stations right at the end of the day. So some of the challenges that later on characterize the process in terms of the collation and the challenges, we didn't have that much, of those issues because our observers were at the polling stations. As soon as the results were declared, they picked the figures and sent to us. And so by midnight, as we stated in our statement, we had an estimate of how the voting was going to, the outcomes were going to be, plus or minus. I mean, if you look at the confidence range that we had a margin of error for the various candidates, which gave us a range within which we're expecting the official results to fall. What the PVT essentially says is that if you have results coming from the Electoral Commission falling outside of the range of estimates that we have for each of the presidential candidates, then there could be some problem somewhere. But to the extent that the figures fall within the range of figures that the PVT is able to provide us, if they align, then we say that they are consistent. The figures may not necessarily be the same, as you can see, for the PVT estimate that CODEO provided. They are not exactly the same as the Electoral Commission's official results. Like I said, this is because this is essentially a sample of polling stations. But of course, if you look at the registered voter population for these 1,502 polling stations, you are looking at over 360,000 voters. And this is what you are tracking. You are tracking the choices, and this is the actual choices that were made at the end of the polls. So, generally, let me just say that 2 points. As far as the voting processes went, there were incidents, and our observers captured quite a number of incidents. But when we put everything together and we look at what transpired at the thousands and thousands of polling stations across the country, we say that, yes, there were some issues here and there, but significantly, this didn't impact on the voting processes. And if you look at the outcomes that were also declared by the Commission, the official results, we haven't seen any significant deviation for us to not have confidence in the outcomes that were declared by the Electoral Commission.